Well, it's a new day. And this morning I'm out exploring some areas that I haven't seen yet this trip. Just kind of hiking around looking for inspiration, trying to come up with a plan for tonight and maybe tomorrow morning. Yesterday I managed to shoot just about everything I had planned that I had scouted already. It was a pretty good day. So today I need something for this afternoon. I got one more full day. It's gonna be a shorter trip this year. I only had about 4 days, and then I gotta get back to my regular life. I'm sure you've noticed that the pacing in between video releases has been a little slower lately. I apologize for that. I've had a new short to medium term commitment in life, so my work-life balance is pretty off. Makes it a little harder to get these videos all edited and put up on time. Certainly not going anywhere. Don't worry about that. I'll still be putting plenty of videos out. It's just that the time in between is going to have to probably be a little slower for a little while. So apologies for that again. But it's an absolutely crystal clear blue sky day again today. I think the forecast is just a little bit cooler than it was yesterday, just a couple degrees. Yesterday was a warm day. It was a little bit of a struggle in the afternoon to stay cool, find shade. But the color is absolutely beautiful this year. I'm starting to get lots of this leaf litter stuff here. So I've been kind of looking at the ground a little bit too as I'm walking through, as well as trying to keep the grand vistas in mind. But it's still early. It's only about a little after 8 in the morning right now. So got lots of time today to figure it out. And as the sun comes up, hopefully we'll start getting some nice light in the canyons here. Get some reflected light, make it look really nice. So this one's a shot that I noticed as I was walking by. I actually walked by this more than once. What it is there's this cottonwood tree that's kind of fallen over here. You see the trunk here is laying horizontally. It's kind of interesting because it's fallen over. The trunk is horizontal, but on the end it swoops up and the branches are full leafed out, so it's still alive. But there's some smaller cottonwoods here above it that are dropping leaves down on top of this horizontal trunk. So what I've got is cottonwood leaf litter on top of a cottonwood horizontal trunk with tree bark. So I framed up a really tight composition here with a single cottonwood leaf. It's a yellow leaf in the middle with cottonwood bark around it. Now the leaves were there, but I took this leaf that I'm photographing and turned it a little bit because I'm pinned in my composition here. You can see where my camera's set up. I can only really come at this from one angle to get my plane of focus to line up. So I couldn't really just move the camera around, and I didn't want the leaf pointing out of the frame, so I turned it to point into the frame a little bit. But it's a tight composition. I'm shooting with my 210 millimeter Nikon Nikkor W f5.6, and I had to use quite a bit of bellows to get this to focus. So it's about 2/3 of a stop of bellows extension here. But it looks really good on the ground glass, so I think it'll make a nice photograph. And I've already gone ahead and shot one sheet of Portra 160 color negative film. For no other reason than I had a holder of Portra in my bag and I wanted to use it up. And I'm trying to save my Velvia film holders for later, so I don't have to go back to the truck and load some film just yet. But as I've been sitting here, this cliff face over here is starting to get some light now, and it's starting to add some dimensionality to this. So I might actually flip my full film holder and take yet another exposure, because I think the light's getting better. Sometimes it can be kind of hard to spot all the reflected light coming into a scene like this. You walk through it and just kind of, it looks good, but you don't really notice how much is actually reflecting into it until you like shade something with your hand and you can see where the light source is actually coming from. It's pretty apparent then. But my exposures were 1 second f32, and that includes the 2/3 stop of bellows extension and no reciprocity. It's also a really flat scene, so it was really easy to meter, just kind of middle gray tones everywhere. I did take a gray card reading just as a reality check to make sure that I was reading the right tones. And other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I use just a little bit of front swing, a little bit of front tilt, and then I'm just using depth of field to help me get focus all the way from the very top edges of the bark down into the leaf and in the background. So everything should be pretty reasonably sharp. But that's about all there is to it. So let's look at the film exposures and let me know what you think down in the comments below. Well, I'm certainly glad I stuck around long enough to make that second exposure.
It's pretty apparent when you look at this rough inversion for the video that the sheet on the right lacks a lot of the dimensionality that the left sheet has, which was taken with better reflected light. Otherwise, both exposures turned out perfectly fine, and I think the Portra color palette did a really good job with this scene. I like the way the lines in the bark are almost on the diagonal, but not quite, and I'm happy with the placement of the leaf, with it turned to point towards the top left corner.
May sound strange, but walking through a lot of these areas with really good, beautiful color, sometimes you just kind of walk by stuff and don't really see compositions very well. You know, sometimes something hits you right away. Other times, you know, really helps to just kind of stop. And that's kind of what happened here. So I was just taking a break in the shade next to these really beautiful maples on either side of the wash. And as I was just sitting there enjoying the shade, it just occurred to me that it's actually a really nice scene. So went ahead and set up on it with the Chamonix 4x5 here. I framed this up with my Nikon 135mm f5.6 lens. This is a new lens to me. I've never shot with this lens. So interesting to see how it does. It'll work to frame this up beautifully, where I've got color on both sides of the wash here. And another tree in the background that's kind of sticking out just a little bit on this side here. Right there. It gives me a little bit of a gradient of color here, because this tree here is nice and bright orange. So is the one in the background, but then this one on the side over here is yellow. Add to that, I got some evergreen trees up here, probably juniper, I would imagine, that are sitting up here. So I got a really nice palette of colors working here. Very right edge of the frame is being hugged by this other evergreen, juvenile evergreen tree right here. And then the foreground is just a wash that's just leading up into the composition here. I think it works really well. Gone for a horizontal composition on this one. I almost went vertical, but decided I wanted more of the trees on the side than wash on the bottom, if that makes sense. Again, I went with my Lee Landscape Circular Polarizer, which takes my exposure down by about a stop and a third. So I had to compensate for that. These rocks in the foreground always tend to go a little bit blue, especially with E6 color slide film. It's because it's reflecting all of this sky color down on the top of these white rocks here. So they go a little cool. My landscape polarizer's got a little bit of a warming effect to it. But in addition to that, some of the yellows over here on these leaves on this side of the wash over here, they're facing straight up and they're also reflecting sky color, which gives them a cyan highlight. So with the circular polarizer, I was able to polarize that off so I get more color, a little bit more vibrancy in the color. The very top of this composition up here, you probably can't see it in the video because it crops it off, but there is a nice bunch of sandstone features up there that are kind of interesting to look at. It's just kind of potted out, you know, and eroded away in certain spots. It gives it an interesting background with that red sandstone. I'm shooting Fuji Velvia 50 again on this one. That's all I brought on this trip. I didn't bring any Provia with me because, well, the years that I've in the past would have dual shot Velvia and Provia. I tend to like the Velvia shots more. So decided to just kind of embrace it and go with that. Just be a little more careful with my exposures. That exposure ended up being 11 seconds f32, but that includes an extra stop and a third for the circular polarizer, as well as reciprocity failure. Yeah, it's a nice scene, I think. It's well worth shooting. The color's beautiful, and it was a nice shady spot. It got warm this afternoon, so it was kind of nice to find a nice shady nook to hide in for a couple hours.
The exposure on this sheet turned out just about perfect. I really think that background helps really sell the composition. And exposure on the rocks in the foreground is bright, but there's plenty of detail. This was my first time shooting with this 135mm lens, and I was really happy with the sharpness and detail. I did ultimately take a second exposure on Ektar 100 just to have a backup, but in the end I ended up preferring the sheet of Velvia for no other reason than it looks good on the light table, and I was proud of it. But I'll show you both versions, and you can let me know in the comments which one you prefer.
So this is an image I shot last year, but I wasn't 100% happy with the way the film turned out. So I thought I'd take another crack at it. And this year, I think the color is actually better. I have a nice gradient from reds over here, right behind me, and then it goes from deep orange to lighter and lighter shades of orange, finally to yellow. And actually the last tree in a row is leafed out and it's leaf litter below it. It's kind of an interesting take on just the whole process of fall color, seems like. But I shot this in the evening time last time, and the reflected light wasn't very strong. So it went pretty blue on me. And the cliffs above it up here, some really interesting detail, but they weren't glowing quite as well as they are now. So I thought I'd shoot it earlier in the day. I don't know that this gets really super strong reflected light down on the bottom of this. I think it's just too shaded in the corner here. But I definitely have some more glow up here on these sandstone cliff above me. That's being caused by this massive cliff behind the camera here. That's completely lit up in sunlight right now, and it's bouncing light in here. It just doesn't quite get down here because there's a big sandstone cliff that's blocking it. So I threw my polarizer on, which is a Lee Landscape circular polarizer. It has a slight warming effect to it, which should help out with a little bit of the blueness. I shot Velvia 50 on this, just one sheet. That's all I'm gonna do, because I've already shot this before. I just thought I'd take one more crack at it, but I don't want to throw a ton of film at it. But that circular polarizer has got a stop and a third of darkening effect to it. So I had to compensate for that, as well as reciprocity failure. So I put my exposure at 11 seconds, f32. Now last time I shot this, it was also a lot closer, and there was this fallen tree that was in the composition. This time I've taken a little further step back because there was more color here on the side. And I tried to omit that log so that it's not a distraction in the background. But I think that's it. I've got another composition I want to check on here before it gets too late in the afternoon. So I'm going to pack the camera up and get moving. So here's that sheet, and let me know what you think down in the comments below.
This exposure turned out to be about half of a stop too bright. But fortunately, Velvia held detail in the highlights all the same, and I was able to darken it down no problem in post. It's a little frustrating though, since this is the second time I've shot this scene. I still didn't get it quite right. But I do still think it was an improvement on my last attempt. There's noticeably more glow in the sandstone in the background, and the wash is a more even tone, which makes it less distracting. The general concept of this photo was to form a wedge of fall color that intersects two opposing wedges, one made from the sandstone in the background and another from the wash in the foreground. My thinking was that by backing up a little bit and including the splashes of color in the top and bottom right corners, that would help achieve that a little better. I also shot this one at 90mm instead of 75 like I did last time. Ultimately, there's things I like about both versions of this photo, and I can't say with absolute certainty that I won't try it again next time I see good conditions.
So today the wind has kicked in and started stripping some of these leaves off the trees. Some of these trees that are past prime are starting to drop everything down into the bottom of the wash, which doesn't mean that everything's over. Once all the leaves start to drop off the trees, no leaf litter accumulates below them, there's a whole other set of opportunities for ground compositions that come from that. So I've been keeping my eye out, kind of looking for leaf litter shots, because those are always fun to shoot. And there's a good possibility with the amount of leaves that have dropped today that I might be able to find one or two of those. So. This composition, I wasn't quite sure was going to happen. I've been sitting here camped out on this for probably about 45 minutes now. It's a warmer day today, and these side canyons here that are in the shade, they kind of start to have a breeze go through them just because of the temperature differential. So I've been sitting here waiting for the breeze to stop. Fortunately, with enough patience, it did, and I was able to expose while it was dead calm, which is really nice. It's not that I'm totally dead set against motion blur, but in a scene like this, I really wanted it still. So I didn't want the trees blowing around on me. This whole canyon scene here is something I've had my eyes on for quite a while, actually. Previous years I've been here, I've wanted to shoot this, but it's been not quite ready. It's been pretty green, and it is still pretty green even this year. But I do have, branches here that are starting to turn color right there, and then in the background, if I can point to it, some pretty good color poking out there. So it's the best I've seen it, although it's still not, peak fall color. But even green, I think it's great because the evergreens in the background, the way they stand out against the red sandstone up here, I think is great. With the cliff edge on the side, plus the wash going in, I think it just makes for a great scene. It's something that I've really always wanted to shoot. So I set this up in a horizontal composition, the Chamonix 4x5. And I framed it up wide with my 90mm Nikon f4.5. I'm shooting Fuji Velvia 50, and there is a little bit of high clouds starting to peek in here, but with the blue sky above it, there's a pretty good chance that some of these rocks, the whites in these rocks, will start to go a little blue. But I didn't put a warming filter or anything on this one because I didn't want it to extend my shutter times even longer. I needed them as fast as I could get them. So as it is, my shutter speeds were 2 seconds, f22. I actually would have preferred to even stop it down further than that, but then again, that would have extended my shutter time. And by the time I get into 4 seconds, it's starting to get into reciprocity failure, which makes my shutter times even longer and longer. And with the breeze blowing, I didn't want to take that risk, so I just shot it as is. So if it's a little blue, oh well, that's the best I could do. But I'm only exposing one sheet, which I've already done when it was calm. I'm not going to bother with shooting doubles on this scene because it isn't really the most perfect conditions. I could always come back here and try again, which I probably will. So one of these years when I catch it in optimal fall color. But regardless, I think it's a beautiful scene. I'm happy I sat here long enough to wait that out, and glad to have that shot in the bag. So let's take a look at that shot on the light table. And as always, let me know down in the comments what you think.
This exposure turned out just about as good as I could have hoped. It's a little on the dark side, but not too bad considering I've got good detail and the bright white rocks in the foreground. The moment in time is good, as the majority of the branches are all perfectly still, but if you look close enough, you can find a branch or two that was moving. Nothing I'm too bothered about. It's also just a touch blue, but I knew in the moment that that was likely, and while I did warm it up just a little bit in post, I actually decided to keep quite a bit of it. As I mentioned in the last video, I had 3 new lenses with me on this trip, and the third and final lens was a Nikon Nikkor M 300mm f9. I actually struggled to find compositions with it, the limited amount of time I had for this trip, but just before heading home, I made one more attempt to line it up on something. I don't have any video of this shot, as the light was well past peak, the sun was going down, and I wasn't actually sure this was going to turn out. I didn't even record my settings on this, because I was sure that I was wasting film, but I was pleasantly surprised by the results. The difference in exposures was the result of having a shutter time in minutes, and while I was trying to compensate for it, the light was changing as it was exposing, making it really difficult to adjust for. Regardless, the whole point of making these exposures was to try the lens out to see how it performs, and I was absolutely blown away by how beautifully sharp the leaf litter and rocks were rendered, even if I did miss focus on the branch a bit. Hey, it was dark. Give me a break. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, you can let me know by hitting that thumbs up button down below. And while you're down there, consider hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next adventure.